I'm Andrew Bennett. I'm the director of the North America Action Team at the Religious Freedom Institute. The mission of RFI is to achieve broad acceptance of religious freedom as a fundamental human right, the cornerstone of a successful society, and a source of national and international security. We put this mission into practice in the United States and around the world through 5 action teams and our Center for Religious Freedom Education. Today, I'll be discussing religious freedom in North America by interviewing Dr. Daniel Mark of Villanova University. Daniel, welcome. It's good to have you.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
And let me just start off by saying we want to welcome you as well as a senior fellow to the North America Action Team, and really look forward to all that you'll be bringing from your background, but also I hope we'll be able to do some interesting projects together.
Very excited to be part of the team. It's an honor to join.
Excellent, excellent. So Daniel, you're assistant professor of political science at Villanova University. Tell me a little bit about your research interests, especially in these areas of American Constitution, but also you do a lot of work on religion and politics. So tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. I've always been interested in constitutional law and the First Amendment. Those are some of the college courses that interested me the most. But in my current research on politics and religion, I actually start from what I see as an underlying theoretical question. And that question is about the nature of our own identity as both believers and citizens. Now, of course, not every citizen is a believer and vice versa. But the idea that there are people who are members of our political community, including us, who are believers. And what does it mean when we come to the public square, when we engage our fellow citizens? What is possible for us in bifurcating or not our identities, and what is desirable in that? What do we want to ask of our fellow citizens when they come into the public square? What arguments, beliefs, positions do we expect them to leave at home, if any? What is it possible to ask them to? What would be good for our country in that respect? And then what that means as far as policy and what is fair and reasonable and possible to ask of each other.
I think often when we think about religious freedom, there is this private-public dimension that we live our religious faith, or if we have particular beliefs, secular humanist beliefs, whatever they might be, we live them both publicly and privately. It's very hard to kind of separate our private and public selves in this respect. Do you think that's a particular point of contention right now in discussing religious freedom in the American context?
Yes, and that's a fantastic question, and it really does show where some of the gap is bridged between some of this theoretical work and then the questions of constitutional law. So when we ask, well, what does religious freedom really mean? You know, I'm certain you know from your own excellent work on religious freedom that a phrase we hear more nowadays is freedom of worship. That could be a neutral, innocent phrase, but it is often used with the implication that what goes on within the 4 walls of the church or mosque or synagogue or temple might be something that's protected by the Constitution. But once you bring your faith out into the public square, it's a different story. Freedom of religion versus freedom of worship being conceived of more narrowly. And I think that one of the lessons we need to focus on in order to get this right is that religion isn't just about private beliefs. For many people, I won't speak for every religion, of course, speak for my own, or maybe you can speak for yours, or I can speak for yours, or whatever you like. But it is a mission, and if religion isn't just about that, then religious freedom isn't just the right to be different or the right to be weird or the right in some cases to be wrong. It's about the right to witness publicly to the more excellent way. It's the right to witness publicly to one's beliefs insofar as the carrying of those beliefs into the public square is something that's part of the faith itself.
And this is, I think, really interesting because obviously religious freedom is fundamental to American democracy. And I mean, certainly as a Canadian, certainly it's fundamental to Canadian democracy. But in the United States, we have this unique connection between the free exercise of religion and its non-established character. So talking about these public expressions of our religious faith, to what extent do you believe that this is really appreciated by most citizens? This free exercise, like, do people actually exercise their free exercise right, both the religious and the non-religious?
Right. Well, it's a right to exercise or not exercise, and right. So in a way, I guess they fulfill it no matter what they do. But you're right that in the American context, it has been a boon, this synergy between non-establishment and free exercise. On one hand, that the government doesn't put a thumb on the scale, as it were, and then also that people are allowed to do their thing unmolested by the government. But to speak about whether people appreciate this, I want to say, sadly, no. I think we live in a time. I mean, not entirely, of course, but I think one of the worries of our current time is that people don't appreciate religious freedom enough now. People don't appreciate how valuable it is, how necessary it is, how salutary it is for our society. And my line on this is that one reason or one danger, one reason people don't appreciate it enough, and the danger that's entailed in it, is appreciating religious freedom enough, is that people don't appreciate religion enough. And that's really the key there. If people don't understand what the benefit of religion is, what it brings to a person, what it brings to a society, then they won't appreciate religious freedom. And I think in the American context, again, we have perfect analogies for this. I mean, where we have a Second Amendment in the United States, of course, as you know, that protects what goes sometimes in the name of gun rights. And a lot of people think that that is just a really awful historical impediment to bring in more regulation. And without taking a position on that myself, I think it's a perfect example to show where people don't think that the possession of guns is valuable, whether they want to themselves or not. They certainly don't think that the right that protects the possession of those guns is valuable. And again, to separate the substance completely and not offer any commentary on guns or the relationship between guns and religion, right? But now if we just translate the conceptual point over to the religion side of the argument, where people don't value religion, where people don't think that that itself is good for us and good for society, then when religious freedom seems like it's a problem, it seems like it's discrimination, they're going to say, well, what are we protecting this for? There's no underlying good anyway.
How much of this do you think is this particular challenge that you've just elaborated upon is a question of formation, where whether it's through our education system, whether it's through the messages that come through the media, the messages that come from political, economic elites and so forth, there is a lack of formation for citizens to grasp this question of religion. So, I mean, you teach at obviously a very prominent university. From your perspective as an academic, what does that formation look like? Is it absent? Are people being handicapped by not having that formation in religion as part of a civic identity?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think it could not be but that you are right on this matter. It has to be a question of formation. I think what that doesn't resolve is where is formation supposed to come from? Whose responsibility is it? Whom should we blame for the lack of formation that we see? You know, we often have a phrase that politics is downstream from culture, and I actually think it's probably a two-way relationship, a two-way street. But there are certainly many ways in which politics and law are downstream from culture. And then, well, whose job is it to make the culture? Is it families? Is it churches? Is it politicians? Is it Hollywood elites? Is it the educational system, universities, and so on? And in a way, of course, the answer inevitably is that everybody has a role to play, but in to what scale? And of course, what are the interactions between them? You know, I am someone who won't surprise you to learn, you may already know, someone who believes that the family is a primary incubator of values. Very controversially, on a related subject, Harvard University had an article about why homeschooling in the United States should be regulated, because it's more regulated because it's so dangerous. But in any case, just on this theme, but the family is a primary incubator. But I'm also someone who believes that our laws and our policies that affect families are deeply important and deeply impactful. And so there isn't going to be a single answer to the question of who's responsible for formation, but we have to start somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think now, as we're trying to navigate this question of religious liberty in our present age, both in Canada and the United States and in other Western democracies, that exact question of who is responsible for giving people the tools, you could say, or the resources to be able to live out their deepest held beliefs so as to contribute to public dialogue for the good of all, to advance the common good. I think this is a really fundamental question that we need to engage in Western democracies, and we seem to be shying away from it, whether it's out of a fear of offending others, or it's a fear of difference. We don't want to talk about difference because it can be messy. So what, from your perspective, would you say are the most pressing challenges right now in the United States towards the most pressing challenges to living out a robust religious freedom, a robust type of pluralism?
Right. Well, that's a big question, probably with a lot of parts. But I mean, one of the cutting edge, I'm not sure the right word, one of the cutting edge fights that we're having now is the battle between religious liberty and anti-discrimination law.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously, any pluralistic society, certainly in the United States, with its history, both the good and the bad, needs to be committed to some form of pluralism, to recognize that we don't all agree on many, many things, including very deeply held things, values, beliefs, positions, opinions, so on. And if that's the case, we need to find a way to live together, and we need to find, if we want our society to survive, to live together, and to do more than live together, I would say, to have a shared civic vision, but certainly a shared civic project. I am someone who believes that we're better off when we see our society as a project that we're all in together than as a place where we can all just keep out of each other's business, and not. Well, I'll leave that point there. But to say that obviously the bedrock of that has to be anti-discrimination. Before we can talk about what we're all accomplishing together, we have to have as a bare minimum that we're not giving each other an unnecessarily hard time. And so anti-discrimination law is deeply important and has obviously a critical place in the history of American political development, given the sad history of so much discrimination. Having said that, we also need to understand deeply and correctly what does and doesn't count as discrimination, because the idea that we shouldn't discriminate against each other is not the same thing as the idea that we shouldn't disagree with each other, that we shouldn't criticize each other. And even that we shouldn't go our separate ways when necessary, right? There are despite what I said about the kind of thick vision of a society that lives together, we don't want to say that everyone has to be on the same page about everything all the time. And religious liberty plays a very important role in this. Indeed, you could say in a way, I don't want to be reductive about it, but it's the other side of the coin of anti-discrimination. Right? Religious people also have the right to walk away sometimes and say, we're going to do things differently, not the way the majority wants, or not the way some special interest group wants. And so that's an area, finding this very difficult balance between religious liberty and what carries today the name of anti-discrimination is really critical. Now, I think we can say a lot more about challenges to religion and religious freedom, of course, as I was alluding to before. I think we actually just need to build up religion, religious faith, appreciation of religion, to undergird support for religious liberty, so on and so forth. But obviously, one of the most contentious and obvious and litigated topics we have now is this tension between religious liberty and anti-discrimination.
Right, and I think it's interesting to highlight this distinction that you made between discrimination and people holding in good faith and in charity very different views. At the RFI, we've been talking a lot and kind of working through an anthropological understanding of religious freedom, and how religious freedom is really grounded in that Judeo-Christian understanding of the dignity of the human person, which is shared by many other traditions, including many secular traditions. So, for example, as a Catholic, and you as a sort of modern Orthodox Jew, I mean, we are going to fundamentally disagree on the person of Jesus Christ, for example, who he is. But if we adopt that kind of anthropological understanding, I see in you the same dignity that I have as a human person, and that human dignity binds us together, and it must bind us together publicly as well. So what would you, this is just sort of expanding a little bit on what you just said, how does that question of human dignity become an important touchstone for us as we seek to move forward in this project of championing religious freedom?
Right. Well, first of all, I do want to agree with and endorse everything you just said about that, the agreement and the disagreement, right? But the agreement is fundamental, but it's also a double-edged sword in a way. So the agreement that we have on the dignity of the human person underwrites the respect that we have for one another, and the idea that I value you as a person. I value your rights. I value your prerogative to live your life according to your conscience and according to the dictates of your God. But it also leads us to this question, okay, what am I entitled to in virtue of that inherent equal dignity that and really infinite, or infinite's maybe not the right word, but the invaluable dignity that I have, the inalienable dignity that I have, because that will come into these claims, or to connect it back to that last point about anti-discrimination. Well, I am a human being with equal dignity to everyone else, someone of infinite worth in the eyes of God, and therefore, this is what I'm entitled to. This is what I demand. This is what my dignity requires of you. And on one hand, of course, we're going to agree that inherent and equal dignity that each of us shares does require much of other people. Requires not only that they not kill us or assault us or kidnap us or these sorts of things. It also requires that they treat us as humans in less severe and less egregious ways, but that it should require that we, as you said, speak to each other in charity and consider each other in charity and in love, address each other that way, so on and so forth. But then again, we come back to, well, what else does that require? Does that require that I acknowledge all your choices? Does it require that I appreciate all your choices? Does it require that I celebrate all of your choices? Does it require that I do things that I don't want to do or believe I can't do because you believe that those things affirm your dignity? And so I completely endorse the underlying point. I'm just kind of adding a twist here that suggests that point itself won't resolve on the level of the Constitution, on the level of law, won't resolve any of those hot button issues.
So what do you think then, Daniel, might be some opportunities that currently exist, maybe some cracks in the secular, as my former colleague Jamie Smith talks about? What are some opportunities that we might be missing as citizens to champion a robust religious freedom in the North American context?
Oh, well, that's a very good question. And I think part of it, if I can start answering it by saying the key to defending religious freedom is promoting religion. I mean, obviously, as a background, let me just say evangelize. So I'm going to leave it to you and your people to do the evangelizing, and I will pray for your success in that. But let me also say that it's important if we want religion, our beliefs to be respected by those who don't share our beliefs, then we do actually need to speak in love and to act in charity. And I think it's obviously true, uncontroversially true, that religious people in America and elsewhere don't have a perfect track record. I don't say this as an exercise in self-flagellation or anything like that, but let's say the first thing we need to say is we of faith have not in the past done everything in our power to win converts. I don't mean in the literal sense, but to give people reasons to believe that we are not bigots and we are not, and so on. And I think it's important that we recognize that, because it is with things that are so, even today when we've come so far in reducing prejudice and so on subjects that are so heated, on subjects about which we feel so passionately, it's easy for temperatures to rise, for things to get heated, and we want to make sure that, and this is why, to interrupt myself, this is why I really counsel people mostly against engaging on these passionate topics in social media. I don't mean to share a view or share an article, but the arguments that take place in the comment sections, right? These aren't productive or conducive to changing, to winning minds and hearts. And so I would say that we have to make sure that we always speak in charity, speak in love. Obviously, we need to witness to the truths that religious communities also don't have a perfect track record of living out the truths that we argue for. We have to be faithful to them. And I certainly speak to myself as much as to anyone here. That truly is self-criticism. I don't point fingers at anybody else here in saying that. And then from there, we have to also make sure that there is good education. We have to make sure that civics, and certainly in America, where public education plays such a large role, as it does elsewhere, of course, we need to make sure that religion is not driven out of civics. We need to make sure that civics themselves are taught well independent of religion. There isn't, even if we didn't have this conversation about religion, religious freedom, we'd probably agree that there isn't a deep understanding of our country of the Constitution and the First Amendment, which in America includes, as you know, religious freedom. And so there are so many things that we need to do, and I think it starts with us and our own behavior, and then eventually it continues to translating that into action in the public square and making sure that the laws in all their various ways not reflect our religious beliefs in the narrow, stigmatized sense, but that they represent those beliefs fairly, that they preserve a place for those beliefs, and that people are educated to know what they are and what they mean.
Yeah, I think you're really speaking about, in many ways, the virtue of humility. We have to, as we engage in the public square, we have to have a confidence in saying what we believe, in charity and truth, as you were saying, whether we have a religious belief or a belief that's founded in a particular philosophy that is not religious, but also to engage in a humble manner where we desire the best of the other and the good of the other. And I think you're right that as religious people, we have a particular responsibility to acknowledge that as human beings, we mess up and we do make mistakes. And throughout the history of the United States, and certainly of Canada, and we're exploring this a little bit in an institutional history of religious freedom that we've done up in Canada, looking at where we've done a good job in championing religious freedom, and other times we've done a pretty rotten job. And how do we acknowledge that and try and obviously learn from that experience? But I think humility really is important if we want to have thoughtful and valuable public debate that allows all those different voices to be heard in a vibrant way.
That's right, and it really takes tremendous virtue that I will not myself claim to possess, to strike that balance between humility and boldness. And it's so important that we have both. And I think we can see where we suffer from a lack of each. I mean, I guess I spoke, you put it better than I did, but I was speaking already about probably the lack of humility. But it's also important that we have boldness, or maybe I'll say that we have courage, to speak of a classical virtue, because it is, in the current climate, it is very easy to shrink away from defending what is unpopular. I think part of the reason, the Supreme Court has had a very good track record, even lately, on specifically questions of religious freedom in the United States. But it's also true that there has not been a, how shall I say, united front among people who share some of our beliefs in defending those things publicly, either because it's unpopular or because it's unprofitable, or so on and so forth. We can have all kinds of different reasons. And so it's important that we have a faithful commitment to the truth and to recognize the obligations that truth imposes upon us to act certain ways and to share it in certain ways, to share it, of course, again, with in charity and in love, but also to share it boldly and not to shrink away from that. And religious freedom, thank God, protects our ability to do that under the law in many cases, but we stand at a point in history now where that might be less so going forward. I mean, certainly those of us who follow this closely in the United States and in North America look to Western Europe and Canada, perhaps to a lesser extent, but certainly Western Europe, of frightening cases of people being persecuted for their religious beliefs, literally for facing criminal charges for things they've just said. In the United States, again, it's more civil penalties but I'm sure you remember the case of the fire chief in Atlanta, who lost a job as fire chief because he expressed a religious belief that he held, a common religious belief that he held, and certainly one that was held by most people for most of human history. And even so, he lost his job in what was obviously, to that point, an extremely successful career. So it's just really, it's really important that we be humble and loving and charitable, but also not shrink from the fight. And that's hard, because when you get in the fight, it gets messy and it gets rough. And it can be very, very taxing, physically, emotionally, and it's easy to slip up in ways, to be uncharitable toward implacable opponents. And yet it's all necessary.
Well, in the context of religious freedom, broadly speaking, you've had a unique position because you've been exposed to broad trends in international religious freedom through the time you served on the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom and a one-year stint as the chairman of USCIRF. How did the experience that you gained immersed in issues of importance in international religious freedom shape your perspective on domestic religious freedom here in the US?
Yeah, I love that. That's actually one of my favorite questions because it's something that I really had a lot of cause to reflect on while serving and afterwards as well, with the memory of all of those experiences. And there's, I guess, I have a dichotomy theme going through all my answers here, but there's a twofold answer to that question. On one hand, going abroad, studying what's going on abroad, and certainly going abroad, seeing what's going on, meeting with victims of religious persecution, meeting with government officials who are carrying out that religious persecution, and so on, really helps bring the temperature down. As I was talking about before, it really helps one appreciate what we have here. And certainly in North America, Western Europe as well, and some other places in the world, we're absolutely blessed. And it's important to remember that that's not just a blessing in this moment in time, but really in world history. You know, if we talk about being the 1%, you know, people in the history of the world who have had the freedom to hold their beliefs and live out those beliefs, and including in America, despite what I said before, still to live them out publicly, you know, again, despite concerns, legitimate concerns that we have. And so it really helps put things in perspective. And yet, the danger of that is that we become complacent. The danger of that is, oh, we don't really have it that bad. But in fact, my experience abroad taught me the opposite lesson. My experience of seeing, you know, and yes, I know enough about history to know that religious freedom is very rare historically, but seeing it in the current time, seeing it up close and personal, seeing victims with tears streaming down their face, with bruises still on their bodies, helped me understand how precious and how vulnerable, how precarious and how rare religious freedom is in the world, which leads to the opposite of complacency. It's a reminder, a painful and really pressing reminder that we can't take it for granted for even 1 minute. We would be fools to think that because we have an incredible, in world historical terms, unprecedented situation today with religious freedom being as good as it is, we would be fools to think that that's the normal state of affairs for human beings. It's anything but that. And to believe that tomorrow will be the same as today because today was the same as yesterday is just an obvious mistake to make. And that's why we need to double down on our defense of religious freedom, why we need to be as vigilant as we can in safeguarding the kind of culture, as well as the kinds of laws, the kinds of politics that makes religious freedom possible, that makes this culture of religious freedom possible. Because I mean, I'm not going to say that it can disappear in a heartbeat. It would probably be a long, slow, difficult road till we saw religious freedom vanish in America or North America. And yet, as I say, religious freedom and other human rights are just not the norm for human existence. And so seeing how good we have it only gives us more reason to be vigilant in defending it.
Well, Daniel, Mark, I think that last point, vigilance in championing and upholding a culture of religious freedom, is a great point to end on. Thank you again very much for your time, and thanks again for your work that you'll be doing with us on the North America Action Team at the RFI.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be on the team and really excited to help this important cause.
Thanks again. To learn more about RFI's work to secure religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, please visit rfi.org. And you can also follow us on social media.